The most important variable in sports and strength conditioning is rate of force development. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of an overstatement, and there's going to be some context, but it certainly is one of the most important variables. Dr. Miller, with a download here on some background information of this variable, what it is, why you should care, and how to improve it. This is going to be valuable, I think, for any coach, sports coach, strength coach, sports performance coach, even personal training. I think you should have an understanding, a working understanding of this variable. And again, how do you change it? How do we manipulate it in order to produce superior performance? And again, I say superior performance. I could be talking about an athlete, but I could be talking about somebody who's older, perhaps, that needs to be able to move quickly in order to save themselves from a fall, right? And save themselves a fractured hip, or like I alluded to just a second ago, we're talking about any sport that you may need to jump high, run fast, lift heavy weights, and be fast under a bar, like weightlifting, you name it. So what is rate of force development? If you look at my figure here, poorly drawn, is force is y, x-axis is time, force over time, force multiplied by time. If we look at a curve on this particular xy plot, you'll see this area under the curve is what we call the impulse. And so impulse is fantastic. It's an interesting variable, but impulse many times is not bound by time. So what I'm saying by that is at 250 milliseconds, this will be the area under the curve. The 600 milliseconds will be under the curve. So if I said maximize your impulse, you could, this is like doing a vertical jump, right? You could take all the time in the world to create a lot of eccentric force. There's no hurry to get off the ground. You just want to get up off the ground as high as possible. And so the time it takes you to do that is not as important. Typically, we break up movements by around 250 milliseconds. So anything that's faster than 250 milliseconds is a faster, higher velocity type movement. Anything a little bit longer than that, up to 600 milliseconds, is a little bit slower movement. So like 600 milliseconds could be your typical vertical jump, where you might have somebody who is doing a contact jump, like a tuck jump, hitting the ground and going, or some sort of barrier jump. Those contact times could be well under 250 milliseconds. A sprinter's foot on the ground is around 140 milliseconds. So why is that important? Why is the timing important? Well, most sports are time restrained. So if I am, changing direction and trying to change the direction faster than somebody else, I want to be able to decelerate and accelerate very quickly, and my foot be on the ground not very long, right? I don't want to have, take 15 minutes, that's exaggeration, of course, with my foot on the ground in order to express enough force for me to change direction, at a high speed movement again. And so those that are great athletes have the ability to generate force in a new direction. We're talking about change direction very, very quickly. Again, deceleration is part of that equation as well. The better decelerator you are, the better accelerator you're going to be. Some people are fantastic at decelerating, and a lot of times it has to do with tissue quality, a little stiffer and things like that. So anyway, the point is that time matters in sports. If you're a weightlifter, you only have so much time to get under a bar when that bar is suspended in midair, right? If you look at some of the great weightlifters, I always kind of tell people when they start in the sport of weightlifting, a lot of people can pull heavy weights that have been training for a while, but they just can't get under the bar. That's the hard part. Pulling big weights is off the floor. I mean, if you train as a power lifter, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can build that up a lot easier than trying to create the speed needed to get under a bar, when it starts, falling to the earth under the influence of gravity. And so speed, time matters. It matters. And I won't get into the argument about can speed be taught, but this is one of the variables that's behind what speed is, okay? And so if the two variables are force and time, and if I look at my figure here, the point then would be when I train rate of force development, if I have a time point that's important, I know that time, whatever the movement is going to be restricted by that time. I mentioned 140 milliseconds, let's say 250, again, that kind of dividing line when we think about plyometric exercises, jump training. You can see that these two lines represent two different slopes. And so this darker line didn't produce as much force in that 250 milliseconds as did the hashed line. And so this person here would be, and if this is a jump or a sport movement or whatever it is, they're probably going to have a superior athletic performance compared to this person if we just remove all the other variables, of course. Okay. And so the question would be, well, this person has the darker line here. How do we move them up here to the checkered line. Now, this movement depends on who we're talking about. So if you have a young athlete, okay, if you have a young athlete, and not necessarily biological age, but just a young athlete, or you're a young athlete, if you just improve force, so you just lift heavier things, you're working on peak force, you're lifting in that 80% range, you're lifting, you know, assuming that your technique and everything can handle that type of load, you're going to see force change at all points. Okay, so it's going to change more so at the speed that you're training. So if it takes you 600 milliseconds to stand up from a back squat, for example, then you're going to get really good out at 600 milliseconds. But the whole curve is going to come up. Okay, and this is especially important again for younger athletes. Again, not necessarily biological age, but just younger athletes. Certainly biological age, athletes. They just need to lift heavier things. I'm not saying the heaviest things. I'm just saying heavier. I've worked with kids over the years, and get the trap bar out and have them do trap bar deadlifts, and you look like a freaking genius as a coach. And you really haven't done anything other than improve peak force. And that in turn has moved this curve up at all time points, even if it's a slower movement, even if we're trying to cue them to move as fast as possible and all those things, that bar is still going to take a little bit of time to move, especially as it gets heavier, right? And so they have superior performance. And again, you look like a genius, like you did something special. All you did was improve peak force. Now that is special if you know that, right? A more advanced athlete, though, if you continue to improve their peak force, they're going to get really good out here. And so they're going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. So it brings in that argument is how strong is strong enough? Well, if an athlete, again, is squatting 2 times their body weight, if it's a male athlete, a female athlete's approaching 1.5 to 1.75 times their body weight in the back squat, you can start saying, well, what else could we do here to improve the rate of force development? Certainly as they clear 2 times body weight as a female and 2.5 times body weight as a male, you should be really asking that question. Okay, we've maxed out this area of this curve, but the curve down here is still the same. In other words, the slope down here is roughly the same, and getting stronger up at 600 milliseconds is not going to improve this first part of this curve very well. And so working on things that are higher speed, so this dotted line also represents, well, let's say that this person is maxed out. They're 2.5 times body weight. It's a male athlete or a female athlete. That's pretty impressive. It's impressive regardless. So how could they improve it? Well, this is where we start moving fast. So like in weightlifting, you do some unloaded movements like a snatch balance, more of a speed balance, not necessarily heaving. This is where you pull in your plyometric work. This is where you employ your speed drills that may not necessarily be sprinting, but they're drills that are promoting over speed movements, whether that's some sort of restraint like a rope or some sort of tether, a parachute, things like that, or whoa and go / the change of gears. It has many different names. It's all the same thing. But all these different forced ways to create overspeed. That's where you're going to see this improvement here. Okay, and it's going to be a little bit more specific to that range. Notice that you're not going to get as good out here, and we can draw the force velocity relationship and kind of represent this in the same way. Specificity of training. So early on, to summarize it, to wrap this thing up, early on in an athlete's career or an individual's career, just increasing peak force will improve rate of force development. But later on, as you're a coach of athletes that have been training for a while, and a while is going to be more defined about where's their force in relation to their body weight, or their loads that they're maxing out with in relation to their body weight, like where are they on that scale? Have you reached a point where they're strong enough? Doesn't mean they stop strength training. It's just maybe your time spent on those things are not as high as it once was. And again, that's sport dependent, and it's person dependent, all these different things. But the point is you have to reach that point and say, okay, what do I need to do more of? Is it more jumping? Is it less, the lifting, things like that? A typical periodized model too, right, will run through this rate of force development. So early on, you'll do more strength training, and you'll bend the curve at all points if it's a young athlete, or more so up at this range. And then you might work back here now as you get closer to a season for this particular individual or meet or whatever. That is more speed dependent. So you start compromising or start compensating a little bit by pulling the volume down with your resistance training, your strength training. You didn't get rid of it, you just pull it down a little bit, and then you start substituting that with some more high performance type of things like speed squats, speed chain squat, whatever. I mean, you can fill in the blank there. That's where good coaching comes in as well, is exercise selection. How do you improve that speed variable? Obviously things like what we say matters, say speed words, all those things that we can talk about, and I will talk about in other videos. But I just wanted to put this this video out here about this important variable, and it's different than power. Power is force times velocity. You can have rate of power development, but power is like impulse in many ways, because you could have an unrestricted amount of time potentially to develop power. Okay, you can jack up the force. It's an equation, right? So velocity kind of wanes a little bit, but if you really ramp up peak force, that's a lot of power, and that's great, but it may not speak to the specificity of the sport, which is restrained by time in some way. And that's kind of the whole point of rate of force development. It has its problems when we measure it, and I'm not arguing all those things. Those are all valid points when it comes to rate of force development, but the concept itself is something to consider when you're writing a training program, both a training program, like 12 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, and in the lifespan of an athletic career. What does the athlete need? And I won't pull into the Bondarchuk correlations right now. I'm running at 11 minutes, and usually people lose interest at this point. But the point is that he found that there's a certain point that strength is enough, and I think anybody that's been in the field knows that as well. All right, hope you found this edifying and enjoyable. If you like this video and want to hear more about what I have to say in varying topics in fitness, strength conditioning, I urge you to subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you in the next video.